The night was heavy with rain, each drop striking the glass like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. I sat in my office, the shadows deepening as the storm raged outside. My chest tightened as I looked at the photographs scattered across the desk, each one a fragment of the life I had built. Daniel said, "It was supposed to be ours, Ethan, not his." His words echoed in my mind, fueling the rage that already burned deep. My hands trembled as I gripped the edges of the desk, veins pushing against the skin, not from fear but from anger. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal, cutting deeper than any wound I had known. Anthony had stolen my project, my reputation, and left me a hollow version of the man I once was. Yet inside the broken pieces, there was something raw and unyielding. A voice whispered to me that this wasn't the end. I whispered to myself, he took my future, but he will pay. Outside, lightning split the sky, a violent reminder that storms cleanse and destroy. I knew then that the storm inside me would not rest until Anthony faced what he had done. Morning came but brought no comfort. The storm had passed, leaving silence heavier than thunder. Ethan walked the empty streets, his shoes splashing in puddles, as his mind replayed Anthony's betrayal. People passed him, faces blurred, their lives untouched by his private hell. He envied them, but also despised their ignorance. Daniel had once warned him, power blinds men faster than greed. The memory struck like glass in the skin. Every corner of the city felt poisoned, its neon lights mocking him. He whispered to himself, this city watched me fall and cheered for him. The rage was sharper now, a blade forming inside. He knew he could not let it rest. The scars Anthony left weren't scars of loss, they were blueprints for revenge. The silence told him only one truth. He had no one else to rely on. Only himself. The office lobby still smelled of Anthony's triumph. Banners of his success lined the walls, photos of smiling executives, masking hidden knives. Ethan walked past the receptionist, her eyes flickering with discomfort, as though she knew the truth but could say nothing. His shoes echoed, the sound sharp and unwelcoming. Every step was a reminder of the empire stolen from him. He paused at the glass wall overlooking the city, his reflection fractured in the pain. He clenched his fists, whispering, "Your empire stands on lies, Anthony." The words weren't for anyone to hear, but for the building itself. He could feel Anthony's presence in every corner, smug and untouchable. But even empires built on deceit crumble when truth claws back to the surface. Late evening fell like a heavy cloak. Ethan sat in a small diner booth, the neon sign buzzing faintly above. Daniel slid into the seat opposite him, his face tense. Daniel said, "You're chasing a storm that will burn you alive." Ethan leaned forward, his voice a whisper yet heavy, "He stole everything. I won't stop." Silence grew between them, only broken by the hum of the lights. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. He had seen the cost of vengeance before. Yet his loyalty to Ethan held him there, caught between warning and support. Ethan's eyes burned with something beyond grief. It was resolve, dark and unstoppable. Daniel knew he could not change his mind. The storm outside wasn't just the weather, it was Ethan himself. Back in his apartment, Ethan opened the old wooden chest hidden beneath his bed. Inside lay the remnants of who he once was, notebooks filled with ideas, drafts of the project Anthony had stolen, photographs of late nights when dreams were alive. His hands lingered over each page, memories rising like ghosts. His chest tightened, but not from weakness. These were not relics of loss, but weapons. He whispered, "This is where it begins again." The room was silent, except for his breathing, steady and heavy. In the corner, the city lights flickered through blinds, painting him in fractured shadows. For the first time since betrayal, Ethan felt control slipping back into his grasp. The rain had dried, but the city still smelled of damp asphalt and burnt electricity. Ethan walked along a quiet alley where broken bottles glittered under flickering streetlights. His chest carried a weight heavier than bricks, the echoes of Anthony's betrayal replaying endlessly. He muttered, "He thought I would break." Yet, the silence pressed back, whispering doubts into his bones. Every shadow seemed alive, mocking him with distorted shapes of his failure. Ethan gritted his teeth, knowing this path would devour him, but retreat was no longer an option. The city was a graveyard of his ambitions, and Anthony had written the epitaph. He felt Daniel's warning clawing at him, but his anger overpowered reason. Revenge was no longer an idea. It was a necessity carved into his veins. The alley stretched endlessly, like a tunnel into hell, and he welcomed it. Inside a cramped bar, Ethan sat alone at a corner table, his fingers circling the rim of a glass he barely touched. Laughter erupted across the room, but it sounded hollow to him, like echoes in a tomb. He remembered late nights with Anthony when they had once been partners, brothers even, before betrayal poisoned the bond. He whispered bitterly, "You were supposed to stand with me, not above me." The bartender glanced at him briefly, but looked away, sensing the storm in his eyes. Every detail around him blurred, except for his memories, sharp as knives. Ethan was no longer the man who dreamed with hope. He was a man sculpted by fire, waiting to burn his betrayer. The bar's warmth could not thaw his fury. Instead, it sharpened it into an edge he would wield without mercy. Anthony's success plastered the city like a curse. Ethan stood before a towering billboard showing Anthony's grinning face beside slogans of innovation and progress. His fists clenched until nails dug deep into his palms. He whispered, "Your progress is built on my ashes." Passers-by barely noticed his fury, their eyes trained on the spectacle of power, blind to the theft beneath it. His breath came sharp like broken glass in his lungs. Anthony's shadow stretched across the skyline, larger than life, but Ethan vowed it would not stand forever. He felt the ache of humiliation, but also the spark of defiance. The billboard mocked him, but it also gave him clarity. He was not powerless. He had the truth, and truth is a weapon when wielded by the broken. Daniel met Ethan under a concrete overpass, where rainwater still dripped from steel beams. Daniel's tone was sharp, his voice rising with urgency. Daniel said, "You're walking into a fire you can't control." Ethan's reply was steady, "I've already burned." The air smelled of rust and gasoline, an omen of danger. Daniel's eyes carried concern, but also fear of what Ethan was becoming. He saw a man consumed by vengeance, no longer the dreamer he once knew. Silence stretched as cars roared overhead, the noise drowning out reason. Ethan's resolve frightened Daniel, but he couldn't abandon him. He stayed, caught in loyalty's cruel chain. In the silence of his apartment, Ethan opened a leather-bound notebook filled with his original sketches and plans. Each line was a reminder of sleepless nights, of sacrifices Anthony had stolen. His hand trembled over the ink, yet it wasn't weakness but rage. He whispered, "These were mine. They will be my weapon again." The city outside glittered with false lights, Anthony's empire shining bright, but Ethan's shadows grew darker. He realized vengeance wasn't born in grand gestures. It started with reclaiming what was his. The notebook was no longer a relic of loss, but the foundation of his war. He pressed it to his chest, feeling the weight of destiny. This was no longer grief. This was declaration. The night air was heavy with silence as Ethan walked into the old train yard, its rusted tracks glowing faintly under a broken moon. He stopped when he saw a figure waiting near an abandoned carriage. The man's posture was calm, his presence steady, like a shadow that belonged to the earth itself. The stranger spoke, "You've already lost much, but vengeance costs more than you know." Ethan's jaw tightened, replying coldly, "I've nothing left to lose." The man's eyes narrowed with sadness, seeing the storm within Ethan. This was no casual meeting, it was fate pulling two broken lives together. The mentor had scars that told his story without words, scars Ethan recognized as warnings. Yet in the darkness, Ethan could not see warnings, only tools. The mentor lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the deep lines of his face. His voice carried weight, each word deliberate. Marcus said, "Revenge is a poison that feeds itself. It devours men until they are shadows of who they were." Ethan's eyes flared with defiance as he whispered, "And what if the shadow is all that remains?" The smoke curled between them like a veil of unspoken truths. Marcus saw the boy Ethan once was, buried under anger's fire. He sighed, not out of weakness but resignation, for he knew the path Ethan chose could not be diverted, only guided. The silence between them spoke louder than warnings. A bond forged in pain neither wished but both understood. Marcus led Ethan through the ruins of the yard, pointing at shattered steel and burned-out lamps. He said, "This place was once full of life, now nothing but bones. That's what vengeance leaves behind." Ethan touched the cold metal, its rust cutting into his skin. He whispered, "These bones are reminders, not warnings." Marcus shook his head but did not argue. He saw determination too deep to uproot. The night was still, yet every creak of old iron felt like the voice of the dead. Ethan carried those voices with him, not as burdens but as firewood to feed his resolve. Marcus's silence was consent, and Ethan knew the mentor would walk beside him, even if only to prevent him from falling deeper than necessary. Inside a dim warehouse attached to the yard, Marcus unrolled old blueprints across a battered wooden table. His scars seemed to glow under the weak lantern light as he said, "I once chased vengeance too. I lost my family for it." Ethan's eyes narrowed, but his voice was steady. "Then you understand why I cannot stop." The lantern flickered, casting jagged shadows across their faces. The silence stretched, heavy with ghosts neither could escape. Marcus's presence was not to break Ethan's will, but to forge it sharper, to remind him that revenge was not free. Yet for Ethan, the price was already paid. What remained was collecting the debt owed to him. As the night drew deeper, Marcus placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his grip firm, heavy with the weight of years. He said, "If you walk this road, every step takes you further from the man you were. Only ruins lie ahead." Ethan's gaze pierced the darkness, his voice calm but lethal. "Then ruins are where I'll find him." The mentor released him slowly, knowing his warning was heard but rejected. Outside, the wind howled through broken windows, carrying echoes of battles long past. Marcus's scars were proof of what awaited Ethan, but scars cannot cage a man who has already burned. The decision was made, and the night bore witness to the birth of vengeance sharpened with guidance. The city's underbelly hummed with secrets, and Ethan walked into a basement bar where whispers bought loyalty. Smoke hung thick, curling like ghosts above shadowed faces. Daniel sat at a corner booth frowning as Ethan approached. Daniel said, "Every move you make drags me closer to your fire." Ethan replied, "Then step aside if it burns you." Silence pressed down until Daniel sighed, torn between loyalty and fear. Around them, low murmurs of men paid by Anthony echoed each laugh like daggers. Ethan studied them, their presence proof Anthony was tightening control. His pulse quickened, not in fear but anticipation. He felt Marcus' teachings sharpening his instincts, turning grief into strategy. For Ethan, the storm was no longer brewing, it was gathering, and he stood in its center, unshaken. Later that night, Ethan and Daniel walked through the empty streets, the hum of streetlights buzzing above. Daniel said, "You're gathering enemies faster than allies." Ethan's reply was sharp, "Enemies reveal themselves, allies must be carved out of stone." His voice carried a new steel, one Daniel had never heard. Ethan's stride was confident, every step pulling him further from the broken man he once was. Daniel glanced at him, uncertain if he was witnessing strength or madness. The silence between them was filled by the city's pulse, a rhythm Ethan was now in tune with. His path was dangerous, but he embraced it as if it were destiny. Every flicker of neon was a reminder of Anthony's empire, and Ethan vowed he would carve through its foundation, one brick at a time. Inside Marcus's small apartment, the walls lined with old books and relics of battles past, Ethan studied the map spread across the table. Marcus said, "Anthony's empire isn't just built on lies, it's guarded by fear." Ethan's gaze traced the marked locations, warehouses, clubs, offices, all pieces of Anthony's control. He whispered, "Then I'll turn his fear against him." Marcus's eyes narrowed, recalling his own descent into vengeance, and yet he saw something different in Ethan, a fire tempered by focus. Daniel leaned against the wall, restless, knowing they were plotting against a man with more power than they could fathom. Yet Ethan's resolve filled the room, a silent force that made both allies realize this war had already begun. Word of Ethan's movements reached Anthony, and in a glass tower office, Anthony stood overlooking the city. His reflection stared back, cold and unyielding. He whispered, "So you crawl back from the ashes." Beside him stood Victor, the enforcer, a wall of muscle and silence. Anthony's smile was sharp as he said, "If he wants war, give him no ground." Victor nodded, his loyalty unquestioned, his presence a warning. Anthony believed his empire untouchable, yet his grip tightened, betraying the first hint of unease. For every storm Ethan gathered, Anthony fortified walls higher, blind to the cracks forming within. The city slept, unaware of the two forces preparing to collide, but the night seemed to pulse with anticipation, as though it knew history was shifting. Ethan sat in his apartment, blinds drawn, the hum of the city faint in the distance. He replayed every detail Marcus had shared, every warning Daniel had whispered. Yet, instead of doubt, his resolve thickened. He said softly, "He stole my future, but I'll rewrite his." His voice carried into the silence like a vow. The storm inside him was no longer chaos. It was direction, precise and unrelenting. He traced his finger across the notebook, each line a step toward Anthony's fall. Outside, the wind rattled the glass as though the city itself shivered at what was coming. Ethan knew there was no turning back, only forward into the storm, where only one man would stand at the end. The following evening, Ethan broke into an abandoned office once used by Anthony's company. Dust coated the desks, but files remained scattered in forgotten drawers. He opened one and froze. Documents revealed Anthony had forged signatures, stolen contracts, and framed allies. His stomach twisted as he realized Daniel's warnings were not just paranoia. Anthony's empire was rot disguised as gold. Ethan whispered, "This is more than betrayal. This is theft of lives." Each paper was a weapon, proof that Anthony's brilliance was a mask for corruption. His hands shook, but this time from power, not despair. With this truth, he could strike harder than ever. The silence of the office felt like ghosts applauding his discovery. Ethan now had more than rage, he had evidence. Ethan showed the documents to Marcus, laying them across the table like daggers. Marcus said, "This is his weakness. But weakness only matters if you strike precisely." Ethan's eyes burned as he replied, "Then I'll cut deep." Daniel shifted uneasily, sensing the danger growing beyond control. He muttered, "This isn't just revenge, Ethan. This is war." Ethan looked at him with calm fury, whispering, "War is the only language he understands." Marcus recognized the transformation. Ethan was no longer the broken man seeking justice. He was a predator preparing to dismantle prey. The mentor saw echoes of his younger self and knew he could not stop him. Ethan had crossed the threshold where truth became weapon, and hesitation became fatal. Anthony's laughter echoed through his glass office as he read reports of Ethan's return. His assistant hesitated. "Warning, he's gathering proof." Anthony's smile twisted, replying, "Proof bends to power." Victor stood silently nearby, a looming reminder of the violence Anthony commanded. Yet, behind Anthony's confident eyes, there was unease. The documents Ethan had found were cracks in the armor, and cracks could spread. Anthony poured himself a drink, staring into its golden swirl. He muttered, "He thinks truth will save him. Truth drowns where power reigns." Still, his grip on the glass trembled slightly. For the first time, Anthony felt the weight of fear pressing against his empire. Ethan stood at the riverbank, city lights reflecting in broken ripples. He held one of Anthony's stolen contracts, the paper trembling in his grip. He whispered, "This is the key. This is how I tear you down." The air was cold, his breath visible like smoke. He imagined Anthony's face, his smug grin, and his rage boil. Daniel approached quietly, his voice low. "Once you unleash this, there's no way back." Ethan's eyes never left the river as he replied, "I don't need a way back." The current carried whispers of inevitability, the water moving relentless and unstoppable. Ethan felt the same, a force that could not be turned. The night was quiet, but his war had already begun. In Marcus' apartment, the three men sat in tense silence. Ethan spread the final document, exposing Anthony's fraud in detail. Marcus said, "With this, his empire crumbles." Ethan whispered, "Then we burn it to the ground." Daniel's eyes widened, realizing Ethan was past redemption, driven by fire deeper than justice. The mentor closed his eyes briefly, haunted by his past choices, knowing he had unleashed another storm he could not contain. Ethan leaned forward, voice cold as steel. "Tomorrow, Anthony will see what it means to steal a future." Outside, thunder cracked across the sky, as though the heavens themselves marked the coming war. The warehouse was silent, except for dripping water echoing through its rusted beams. Ethan stood near the entrance, shadows curling around him like armor. Daniel paced nervously, whispering, "This is madness." Ethan's voice was calm. "Madness is letting him win." The silence broke when Victor emerged from the far end, his presence filling the space like thunder. His heavy footsteps echoed, each one announcing danger. Marcus stepped forward, his tone grave. "Violence will feed Anthony, not break him." But Ethan's eyes locked onto Victor, his body rigid with anticipation. For years, fear had shaped him, but tonight he was steel. The confrontation was no longer avoidable. The enforcer was the wall he had to break through before reaching Anthony. Victor's fists cracked like breaking stone as he advanced, his silence more terrifying than words. Ethan stepped forward, unflinching. Victor swung first, the punch shattering a wooden crate near Ethan's head. Splinters flew, but Ethan didn't retreat. He countered, his movements sharp but desperate, fueled by rage rather than skill. Daniel shouted, "Ethan, stop!" but his voice was swallowed by the storm of fists. Marcus stayed silent, watching with eyes that saw history repeating itself. Ethan's chest burned with pain, his lips split, yet his resolve hardened. He whispered through blood, "You can't stop me." Victor's expression flickered, the first sign of doubt, as if Ethan's will was a weapon sharper than his fists. Light dragged into chaos, crates smashed, dust filling the air like smoke. Ethan ducked under Victor's strike and rammed him into a steel beam, the sound echoing like thunder. Victor roared, swinging again, but Ethan absorbed the blow, stumbling yet standing tall. Marcus finally shouted, "Enough!" but the two men were beyond words. Ethan's strength came not from muscle but from pain turned weapon. Every strike was a memory of betrayal, every block a refusal to fall again. Victor, for all his power, began to falter, his loyalty cracking under the weight of Ethan's relentless fire. Ethan growled, "You're just another pawn in his lies," his words cutting deeper than his fists. Victor staggered back, blood dripping from his mouth. For the first time he spoke, voice low, "He owns me, but I see now, he doesn't own you." His words carried resignation, a warrior's recognition of defeat. Ethan stood trembling, chest heaving, but his eyes burned with victory. Marcus stepped forward, his tone softer now. "This war isn't against men like him, Ethan. It's against the lies that bind them." Daniel looked at Victor with pity, while Ethan offered none. Instead, he whispered, "Your chains are his, not mine." The warehouse grew silent, the storm of fists replaced with a fragile truce. Victor lowered his head, no longer Anthony's blade, but a broken man free of his grip. The battle's echo lingered, but Ethan's focus sharpened. Victor lay defeated, yet the true enemy remained above the city in glass towers. Ethan whispered, "Anthony's next." His voice carried not rage, but deadly calm. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder, weary eyes pleading for restraint, but Ethan brushed it aside. Daniel muttered, "You're crossing a line you can't return from." Ethan replied coldly, "There's no return when the future's already stolen." The warehouse walls seemed to close in, the silence suffocating, heavy with the promise of what came next. Ethan was no longer fighting for survival, he was marching toward reckoning. The path forward was clear, and nothing, Not fear, not loyalty, not love, could turn him from it. Anthony's tower gleamed like a crown over the city, its glass walls reflecting a world he claimed as his own. Ethan walked into the lobby, every step echoing with defiance. Security guards eyed him, but Victor's silence had paved his way. Ethan whispered, "The higher he climbs, the harder he falls." The receptionist froze at his presence, sensing a storm approaching. He passed her without pause, his reflection fractured across the mirrored walls. Each step toward the elevator felt like destiny unfolding, a path written in betrayal. The city outside buzzed, unaware of the confrontation brewing at its heart. But inside Ethan's chest, silence roared louder than thunder. The reckoning had arrived. The elevator hummed upward, floor after floor, sliding past as Ethan's reflection stared back in the polished steel. His fists clenched, his breath slow, each second stretching like eternity. Memories of betrayal, of stolen dreams, of Anthony's laughter carved into his mind. He whispered, "This ends tonight." The doors opened to Anthony's private floor, silence pressing like a weight. Anthony stood near the window, back turned, city glowing beneath him. He didn't flinch as Ethan entered, instead saying smoothly, "So the ghost finally walks among the living." Ethan's reply cut sharp, "I'm not a ghost, I'm your reckoning." Anthony turned slowly, his smile sharp as glass. "You think truth destroys power. Power bends truth until it breaks." Ethan advanced, eyes unflinching. "Not when truth bleeds from your empire." Anthony poured a drink calmly, his arrogance unshaken. Ethan's rage was ice, not fire, and that terrified Anthony more than fury. Marcus's voice echoed in Ethan's mind, "Vengeance devours." Yet Ethan pressed on, whispering, "You stole my future, Anthony. Now I'll take yours." For the first time Anthony's glass shook in his hand, a tremor betraying fear. The empire he built on lies had begun to fracture in the presence of truth. Their words turned to violence, Anthony lunging with desperation, striking Ethan across the jaw. Ethan staggered but stood firm, his fury anchored. He countered, slamming Anthony against the glass window, the city sprawling below like a witness. Anthony gasped, whispering, "You'll become me if you do this." Ethan's grip tightened, his heart torn between vengeance and the humanity Marcus had tried to preserve. Daniel's warnings thundered in his mind, but so did the victim's silence. Ethan growled, "I'm nothing like you." He released his hold just enough, forcing Anthony to crumble under his own weight. The empire's king stood trembling, no longer untouchable. Anthony collapsed to his knees, the illusion of power shattered. Ethan stood over him, chest rising with steady breaths. Marcus's words echoed, "Revenge leaves ruins." Ethan whispered coldly, "Then ruins are where you'll remain." He turned, walking toward the door, leaving Anthony broken amidst his glass kingdom. Daniel stood in the shadows, eyes wide with shock, but also relief. The storm inside Ethan finally stilled, not with joy but with release. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, the city trembling as if it too felt the fall of its false king. The war was over. Ethan hadn't reclaimed his old future, but he had written a new one in the ashes of betrayal.